are starting now. So our next speaker is Pat Allan. He is going to talk about open source, power and the passion. So about Pat, so he's from Melbourne, Australia. He's a software developer and also event organizer. He runs several Rails camps, and he has already run like several Rails camps around the world. He's using Ruby since 2007, and is little obsessive in watching live comedy shows. He often cooks pancakes for friends, and he's looking for ways to make the world a little better. So let's welcome Pat.
Thank you. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back after lunch. I hope you enjoyed it. As you've heard, my name is Pat, and it is great to be here in Pune, and perhaps you'll pick up on my accidental pattern that I'm using in my presentation, especially the name, Power and the Passion. Okay, that's probably enough. Don't need to overdo it. Don't suppose there are any other Australians here in the audience? Nick, I don't think you count. Well, perhaps even so, someone here may have spotted the fact that my talk's name has been stolen from the title of a song by Australian rock legends Midnight Oil, or The Oils, if you really want to be Australian. Australian. For anyone who didn't get the reference, which is probably most of you, don't worry. I'm not going to be going through their back catalogue any further. And really, rather than rock music, I'm here to talk about something completely different. Instead, my focus will be on open source and its strengths and weaknesses, to discuss whether it's sustainable, and perhaps see if we can improve things. And I do realize that the term open source is used in many ways. And I don't want to get caught up in the semantics, so maybe we should go with the one from opensource.org. Seems like a reliable source. I think it's pretty clear. And they say that open source software is software that can be freely used, changed, and shared in modified or unmodified form by anyone. That sounds pretty much right. Although I am a fan of Nadia Eghbal's preferred definition, which is modern open source is about building and collaborating in public. Granted, that is a little more focused on the how rather than the what. Now, I'm going to go easy on you. I'm going to start with some things that you probably already know, and we'll work our way up as we go. At every level of what we do, we rely on open source software. Our text editors are open source. Our programming languages are open source. Our gems, our package managers, our web servers, and most of our production operating systems are all open source. But why? Why do we use all these different pieces of open source software? Well, through them, we get to stand on the shoulders of some pretty smart giants. Using open source software gives us an amazing productivity boost. There is so much that we do not need to write ourselves because others have already gone and done it. And that is wonderful. Of course, it is software, and software is not perfect. But when things do break, we have the option of trying and fix things ourselves. And honestly, it probably saves us a lot of money as well. It also, though, can provide a sense of community. Groups of people working together, helping each other. The collaboration aspect that Nadia has referenced is a key part of this ecosystem. All in all, open source is a source, no pun intended, of great power for our industry and for us as individual software developers. And the fact that this has been done together, a massive effort of collaboration, crossing borders and beliefs, is wonderful. And developers around the world have built all of these things, not because they had to, though sometimes they did, and not because they were paid to, though sometimes they were, but because they wanted to. Creating things is a source of joy for many of us here. Problem solving, too, can be a lot of fun. And many pieces of open source software come from scratching our own itches, solving our own problems. What that means, though, is that open source software is often built in our own spare time. And that's fine, because code is more than our work, it is our passion. Okay, maybe that's not always the case. And I'm well aware that passion is a problematic term when mixed with work. I'm also aware that many of us have not contributed to the open source ecosystem. I haven't had any luck finding any statistics, but if I had to guess, it wouldn't surprise me if no more than 10% of all developers have ever written any open source code. And that is completely understandable. I'm not trying to pick a fight here. I mean, some of us have children to look after. Some of us aren't getting paid Silicon Valley money and maybe need to work a second job. Maybe you have other commitments. And some of us perhaps just aren't quite sure how. Not everyone has the expertise. Contributions require time, understanding, and energy. And having all three of those in the same moment is a tough ask. And even more so when it's not your own project you were thinking of contributing to. And when it comes to finding time, well, most people aren't paid to work on open source, so it usually needs to be from our own spare time, and that is not a privilege that everyone has. I am using the word privilege deliberately here. I know it's getting used a lot these days, but privilege is not a bad thing, but it must be acknowledged. It must be recognized so we can adapt accordingly. This open source privilege is why relying on GitHub profiles and activity metrics for hiring judgments is flawed, though it's great to see GitHub have at least removed some of those statistics from profile pages recently. We need to recognize that many people aren't in a position to contribute to open source, so it must not be a metric for determining who is a good developer. And we know that the tech industry has a diversity problem. It's clear at this conference, it's clear at every conference I attend. And in some ways, our focus on open source contribution, an area dominated by privileged men, exacerbates that problem. And we give away our hard work, our valuable time for free. For free. Truly, the very height of privilege. But there's a bit more to it than that. We live, for me at home in Australia, for most of you here in India, we live in capitalist societies, whether we like it or not. And writing open source software does not pay the bills. So giving away our hard work and our valuable time for free is inherently a political action. Oh, I missed a slide. There we go. And if you look back at history, perhaps this political aspect to open source isn't so surprising. The GNU public license, which has been around since 1989, a fair while, mandates that any code you write that uses or is a modification of GNU licensed code must also be released under the GNU license. Essentially, everything GNU code touches must also be GNU code, a free software virus, if you like. And that is not a bad thing, it just is what it is. After all, that is the goal of GNU, that it should be free to view, modify, and redistribute all the source code for all the software in the entire world. That's what they're aiming for. And then there's the interesting juxtaposition that in some countries, particularly in the USA, there has been lobbying for increases to the minimum wage and for all internships to be paid. And indeed, no argument from me, people should be paid fairly for their time and their effort. But open source software is different somehow? Maybe because many of us are already quite well paid? Again, that privilege shining on through. And giving away our code for free is only part of the problem. As well as freely sharing our own code, we use others' code as well, and we rely upon it. And not just code either, but APIs and services too. Tools like RubyGems, NPM, Homebrew, apt. And while open sourced code is free, servers are not. As an example, the servers and other infrastructure for RubyGems cost around $32,000 per month. That's a touch over 2 million rupees. And that figure does not include developer time required to maintain those servers. And that distinction is important, because when we rely on these services, we're not just expecting people to spend their time on writing code, but also on support, answering questions, patching security issues, and with tools like RubyGems, upgrading servers and keeping them secure. We want them to do these things. I guess this is the joy that comes from having the right combination of skill and luck to build something, a gem, a service, what have you, that other people start relying upon. It's also worth recognizing the emotional labor involved in supporting open source projects. If you're not familiar with the idea of emotional labor, it is when people have to manage their own feelings as part of their work, which is particularly common in service roles, serving people in shops and restaurants, on the phone, many of the staff here at this hotel. And open source maintainers too, they face this effort in their interactions with others via support requests, patches. They are correctly expected to be polite and helpful, even in the face of rudeness and impatience. And I think we're all aware that there is plenty of rudeness and impatience out on the internet. And in our industry, just like in society more broadly, we're often terrible at recognizing and appreciating this emotional labor. You'll often see open source described with the label free as in speech, rather than free as in beer. But I think the more appropriate label, was first suggested by Jacob Thornton of Bootstrap, is free as in puppy, which I think gives a much better indication of the energy required to contribute to the community in this way. Now, these are broad strokes that I've been laying down. There are, of course, caveats and exceptions. We're lucky enough to have some companies that pay employees to work on open source projects. And we also have companies that pay open source maintainers for support and new features. And we even have people who pay for the servers that I've mentioned. And all of this is greatly appreciated. Still, many of these open source services have become critical infrastructure for our own work. They are incredibly important. We expect them to always be there working, and yet we don't pay for them. I wonder, do we value open source work less because we don't pay for it? And there is other infrastructure in our everyday lives that we rely upon as well, things like roads, welfare systems, government. We do pay for those, albeit indirectly, through our taxes. So should we be paying a Ruby tax? Now, I'm not suggesting that everyone should pay to use these systems. Again, I missed a slide. There is certainly value in keeping things free. We want to keep that barrier of entry as low as possible for anyone who is trying to learn how to code. But if everything's free for everyone, then the good times aren't going to last. Nadia Eghbal has been writing a lot about this over the past several months. There is so much great value in what she has published. I'll share a link at the end of the talk. And it's also great to see she's just been hired by GitHub to continue her work, which is brilliant. But this idea of a Ruby tax, well, tax systems allow for some people paying but not others, right? Those who don't earn a large amount of money don't have to pay tax. Those who can pay do so. Well, I guess unless they spend all their money on sneaky accountants and lawyers instead. The organization Ruby Together, which I know some of you have heard of, is perhaps the closest thing we currently have to a Ruby tax. I mean that in the nicest possible way. You can pay a monthly fee as a member, and that money goes towards maintenance, support, and new features for Bundler, Ruby Gems, and other important Ruby infrastructure. Stuff that matters to all of us. And that's just one approach of supporting our ecosystem. There are other possibilities. You could pay for pro editions of gems like Sidekick, or you could pay open source maintainers directly for support, or maybe investigate micropayment systems like GitTip or others, and these are just a few suggestions. I'm sure there are more. Sorry, you weren't expecting to think about money and taxes today, were you? But if we were to pay a Ruby tax, how would we decide which gems and services get financial support? How popular would they need to be? How would you even think about measuring such things? We'd probably need an elected body to make these decisions. Do we need a Ruby government? These are just ideas. I just want to see what you're thinking in a bit. But I know I'm harping on a lot about the money, but that's just one part of the broader picture. The overarching goal is to have a sustainable ecosystem for our industry. Currently, I don't think it's unfair to say that what we have now has been built on the broken and burnt out minds of once passionate developers. Lindsay Bieda put forward some excellent thoughts on this matter out onto Twitter earlier this year. This is just some of what she had to say. And it was tough not to share every single tweet in the thread. You've got two here, and again, I'll share the link later on. But let me be clear, this is not a financial problem. This is a cultural problem. Wait, that shouldn't be singular. These are cultural problems. There is more than one. So let's recap. The first one, our open source ecosystem is built on top of privilege. And again, that privilege itself is not bad. The fact that it underpins everything is the problem. And we have become entitled. We're so not used to paying for things, not used to valuing people's time and labor. And that has led us to rely upon everyday infrastructure that we don't pay for. Such a downer, sorry. But don't despair. There are ways forward. As mentioned, we have many large, successful businesses supporting open source software financially. Companies like Heroku and GitHub and EngineYard, and I'm sure there are companies here in India who do the same. And to all of those companies, thank you very much. And in the Ruby community, as I've already mentioned, we're very lucky to have Ruby Together, who look after Ruby Gems and Bundler and so on. We also have programs like Rails Girls Summer of Code, which helps tackle the lack of diversity in our industry, but also, I feel, addresses the privilege inherent in the ecosystem. Now, we can't just step back and applaud these groups for their fine work. Well, we can and we should because it is fine work, but we also need to roll up our sleeves. We need to contribute as well. For those of you here in this room who lead development teams, maybe even run your own company, please get your organization to support the groups I've mentioned or others like them. Give them some money. Alongside that, it would also be wonderful if you could allow your team to work on open source projects in company time. It doesn't have to be something grand like a day a week. I know that's a big ask for most people. But we need to reinforce the fact that the open source ecosystem is a shared platform and deserves attention from as many developers as possible. And if I jump back to Nadia Egbal's description of open source, that is both building and collaborating, I think we're doing okay with the building. I think we've got that one sussed. But the collaborating, that's what needs particular improvement. So for those of you maintaining open source projects, there are some great opportunities for you to help improve what we have. Firstly, I recommend being a little more active in seeking out contributions. Part of why maintainers become burnt out is because we're not so good at sharing the load, and I speak from personal experience here. So investing a bit of time and effort into making it easier for others to help you is probably worth it in the long run, especially if your project is somewhat popular. Charlotte Spencer has written an excellent blog post recently on this topic, and you should all read it. Again, it's a link that I'll share later on, and I'll tweet all these links too. But there are some great points in what she has to say about writing readmes well, logging issues in an intelligent manner, and why having a code of conduct for your project is really important. Also, when you do receive contributions from others, whether they be pull requests or issues or something else, please make sure you respond thoughtfully and respectfully. Ellie Meredith, who spoke recently at RubyConf Australia on the topic of feedback, she has some great things to say, particularly in relation to working within your teams, but I think there was a lot of wisdom in what she said that can be applied more generally, certainly in the context of open source collaboration. That'll be another link that I share. It's definitely worth a watch. But if we jump back to my made-up statistic, only 10% of you have ever contributed to open source. Well, in this room, you're all wonderful, so I'm sure it's higher. But still, what advice can I give to those who haven't dived in yet? Let's start by acknowledging that helping out can be daunting, can be a little scary. So try and search for the low-hanging fruit. Find the easy things. It could be something as simple as writing a detailed bug report. Very useful. Writing documentation patches, even better. Love it. Or you could look at tools like Your First PR, which was written by Charlotte Spencer, who I just mentioned, and that will, they have a Twitter account which tweets out pull requests and issues that are aimed at beginners. But also be aware that you may start something and then you might get stuck. You might not finish it, and that's okay. You've tried, and you've probably learnt something. And look, I know all of these things are just small steps. The journey is ongoing. I wish I could stand here and give you the definitive answer. We could let balloons rain down and streamers go off and everything's fixed. But these are big cultural changes, and big cultural changes are hard. We aren't going to change overnight to become a wonderfully sustainable industry. We are, after all, entangled within larger societies and cultures which are sharing in this struggle. And the open source ecosystem is far from perfect, clearly. I've spent a good part of my talk picking holes in it. But even so, it continues to provide amazing value to us all. And knowing what the problems are is a key step in finding the solutions. And this is a big part of why I wanted to give this talk, to get your wonderful and intelligent minds thinking about these problems, if you weren't already, and see what solutions you can suggest. Awareness helps us all to be more empathetic, helps us all to be more compassionate. And you have this awareness now. So I look forward to hearing your contributions in this journey towards making open source, our industry, and our community more sustainable. Thank you. That's the link that has all the other links that I've mentioned, and I'll be tweeting that shortly if you don't have time to write it down.
Thanks, Pat, for the great talk. So we have time for a few questions. Any question?
All right, I'm leaving the floor open for some questions before I step in. I think I saw a hand raised somewhere.
There's one over here, just on the other side of the pillar.
All right. There you go. So there are 2 points in relation to the presentation. So one, that both in relation to collaborating. So one, again, even if you're thinking in terms of, we are again thinking in terms of money, in terms of capitalism. In general, in an organization, one of the things that we miss out, we determine success, or we determine everything in terms of the money, and we are again doing that for open source as well. Most of the contributions, many of the contributions, it may not be, so we need a Ruby tax, in a sense. We are talking about contributions coming, but a major chunk of this contribution is coming from people who are using those tools themselves, right? So they are providing that through labor that they're doing. Again, if you're looking in terms of purely money, we are thinking of in the same bottom line sort of idea. What we're missing out, maybe perhaps it is better to have a culture within organizations to realize, so when we are hiring, we talk about passion, we talk about problem solving. We need to start having organizations think in terms of passion and problem solving as well, rather than determining themselves. Because considering that labor is coming from that, with that idea, you need to consider the organization success also on the basis of that. The second part is that there's a very interesting joke that a friend of mine makes that, you name a verb and, a verb.js exists. Name any word and something.js of it exists, or something or gem a gem of it exists. So at some level, I actually think that the freedom as a puppy might actually be a bad idea, because it is opening too many opinions at the same time. So at some level, there has to be an organization to what this labor is towards. So rather than increasing the set of things that are happening together, it is better to improve whatever the set is there. So somehow the idea of, no, not question, just a comment. All right, so Pat, any comments to the comments?
There was a lot there to take in. I think there's a lot of good value in what you're saying, and there are challenges no matter which way you approach it, from a business financial sense, or a culture and a passion sense. And I think, yes, getting contributions outside of work hours is not always the right solution, but I don't have the answers. But I appreciate your input. Thank you.
All right, so thanks. So Pat, a very touching topic, and I'll give you a little bit of background about what I'm going to say here. All right?
Okay.
I'm sorry for hogging a little bit of the limelight here.
Okay.
Your statistics about 10%.
That was
people
made up, but
contributing.
sure.
You know what? Actually, let's be realistic here. It's probably 99.3% of the people here are consuming open source, and maybe 0.7% are actually actively contributing back, right? To that effect,
at Josh, we wanted to make a difference and see how our team starts contributing. So all the stuff that you actually had in your talk is things that we've been trying. From a top-down management, tell the people to start contributing to open source.
Great.
Time is a constraint. Labor, as he said, is a constraint. Motivation is a constraint. And I'd love to invite you to look at Code Curiosity that we've built. There's a platform which is, and if you like to, would like to putt a few holes, there's a putting, golf kit here.
I've noticed everyone seems to be crowding around.
Right. The reason for that golf putting course was to get people there to actually see what we built on Code Curiosity, which is a platform which measures the open source contributions that you're doing.
Okay.
So it's consider it like the Fitbit for open source contributions. Everyone knows running is good for you, but when you have a measurable device, it gives you that added incentive to run, to see, tap your finger and say, hey, I've done 9,000 steps, let me walk a little more, let me take the steps instead of the elevator. Similarly, we've opened up a platform for the community where you can sign up from your GitHub handle, and it starts measuring your open source contributions. Now, doing your open source contributions is one thing, but making it fun, motivational, and rewarding is altogether a different thing. What we do here is when you sign up, we are measuring on a monthly basis, on a daily basis what you're doing, and on a monthly rewarding basis, we are giving you all points which can be actually converted to money, where 10 points is effectively $1. The reason we are doing this is to see how we can actually reward your open source contributions.
Okay.
Right? It has opened up different avenues of promoting a repository, promoting a group, and in your spare time sometime, I'd love to have you come there and see, if you're talking about Ruby together. I'd also like to mention, a lot of people have come and asked me, okay, I get it, right? And if this is a common question, yes, contributing to open source is good, but how do I start? README is great. There are two additional portals which I'd like to talk about here. That is Code Triage and Docs Doctor. A Code Triage is a place where you can just go and say, I like this language, I like this repository, and it'll send you an email telling you, hey, work on this. And you pick it up, you don't have the time that day, leave it, do it the next day, but it's giving you that particular direction to go in. If you're not too comfortable with the code initially, you can look at updating the documentation. So there are plenty of ways to do it. It's just a matter of pushing you over the edge and pushing people, even if you're able to get the push from 99.3% to say, even 1% of active contributors, I think the difference that you said in your talk would be huge.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we should talk about this.
Happy to.
And if anyone else has a longer discourse
There's
than mine, the
Question
floor
down
is
the
still
back
open.
there.
Somebody, raise their hand.
Right down the back near the far pillar.
I'm sorry, I don't know who raised their hand here. Yeah. You have to now beat his talk time and my talk time.
Actually, I just have one question. So, a lot of, I don't know, I feel like the most popular open source projects probably would suck up most of the funding which comes in through donations, etc. So how do we make sure that the less used stuff, bigger projects like Rails have companies supporting them, and something on a more medium level might have individual donations coming in, but the smaller things, how do we ensure that even the smallest of things which is critical to someone somewhere manages to get resources in this way?
I think it's a really tough thing to manage. I mean, I kind of hinted at that with the whole Ruby government idea of how you make those decisions. But also, I think it's worth reinforcing that money isn't going to be the solution for all of these problems. It can help, but not all of us are going to have the time anyway to freelance on the side to use that money to work on open source. So maybe a better focus would be encouraging your organizations that you work with or for to give you that time to help look after the smaller gems. Because you're right, the smaller ones aren't going to get funding or donations or big companies chipping in employees to help look after them. But I'm not really sure what the answer is yet.
Hey, hi. Suppose someone have some idea and he want to develop something. How can he get somebody to involve in your project? Say you have some great idea in your mind. Say, for example, WhatsApp providing you a facility to encrypt your messages. Long back, around 4 years back, I started developing an Android application which encrypt your messages. And my plan was to encrypt even voice data also. I pushed it, it's on a GitHub repository, but I wasn't able to involve other guys in that particular thing. So how to promote we are doing something and how to get other people to involve in our projects?
Not quite sure I understood there, and maybe we should have a chat properly afterwards. But it's the question around how do you get other people interested to contribute in projects?
So if you have an idea
Yep.
and you put the idea out there on GitHub,
Yep.
how do I get more people to be interested in contributing to that repository?
I think you need to find people who are going to use it, who find, and that might be going to meetups and chatting with people, but it's really hard. Everyone has their own ideas and everyone's kind of vying for your attention. It's the same with building a social network. How are you going to get people to use it? You've got to give people something that they're particularly interested in. So yeah, if you find people who would want to use this potential gem and then are happy to work on it and hopefully have the time, then that's one way forward. But yeah, it's a really tricky thing.
So well, Pat, it could also mean just persevere. If you're really passionate about it, I'm sure there will be some use for it. And if, these are excellent stages where you can actually come and talk about it. Go to, like Pat said, go to a meetup, submit the talk to a conference. Even if it doesn't get accepted, it doesn't matter. The idea is already out there. You struggle hard enough, I'm pretty sure you can make it. In fact, most of open source tools have made it big after years of effort on it, right?
I don't know about most, but some have. I mean, I know that I've written, look, maybe 30, 40 gems, and only 1 or 2 get widely used.
Yeah, but then you get invited to speak at conferences.
Oh, well, I'm not saying it doesn't help, but like, you can write a huge number of gems. That doesn't mean any of them are going to be popular. And they don't necessarily need to be. They might be serving a niche that only a few people need, but if it does the job well, then brilliant.
So put your head down, put on the blinkers, and do it.
Yeah.
Right? Thanks a lot, Pat. That was
No worries.
awesome, guys.
Thank you all for listening.
Okay. Thanks, Pat.